So welcome back to the next episode of Bioblast. I am your host, Devin Zeidelman, Director of Scientific Real Estate Advisory Services with Scheer Partners. I have the pleasure of being joined by Jeff Galvin, the founder and Chief Executive Officer of American Gene Technologies, AGT, and Addimmune. Thanks so much for joining us today, Jeff.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So we talked a little bit before just about your background, sort of the arc of your career. Kind of looking in retrospect, you started off in Silicon Valley, taking an entrepreneurial journey, retired in your 40s, and I guess had the mindset that you'd be off sailing the Caribbean, maybe with some mojitos in your hand, but you decided to come back to work, and specifically in the biotech sector. So we'd love to understand just sort of your background and then how you got to where you are today, working within the life science space.
So in the early 70s, I discovered a computer in the basement of my junior high school and fell in love with computers. Back then, they were mini computers. It was sort of the first scaled down version of mainframes. And I saw a very exciting future for computers. And I became passionate about it because I thought that it was something that was going to improve lives. And I was so nerded out on it that I actually started wandering around MIT. I ended up teaching classes at MIT on weekends in basic programming. At age 14, I turned 15 when I was there. I ended up going to Harvard, and with my teaching background, I ended up teaching a beginning computer science class for non-computer scientists as a head teaching fellow. In this general education course called Natural Sciences 110. About 1,200 people would take that every year. And I would even get to give the lectures when the professor was out of town and run a team of 30 teaching fellows, which are teaching assistants, basically. So after I graduated, I got recruited by Hewlett Packard out in Silicon Valley. And I went out there and worked as a software quality engineer briefly until I met Apple Computer, which just lit my entrepreneurial fire and appealed so much to my love of computers, my passion, the idea that these are for everybody. Because that's what I had been doing all that time since I was teaching at MIT and Harvard. I was sharing my passion that everybody should, learn something about computers because it was going to benefit them. And now I was out there working with a company that was going to put computers, in every home. So I had a great career after that with a bunch of startups, and I ended up retiring at about age 42. And I bought a house in Hawaii, and so I wasn't sailing the Caribbean, but I was out on the beach in Hawaii. And believe it or not, being retired gets boring pretty quickly. But then I got married, so that made it interesting again for a little bit. And then finally, about 5 years into my retirement, I just wanted to get back into something. And I thought I would just dabble in computers again. But I happened to meet somebody at National Institutes of Health who showed me viral vectors. And this is sort of the early gene and cell therapy space. And my head just exploded. When I saw the idea of viral vectors, I realized that they were showing me the diskette that would deliver new software to the operating system of the human cell. Right. And that now that we could go ahead and turn viruses, crack them open, get rid of the viral DNA and put good DNA in there, instead convert viruses into updates. Coming from the software industry, my head just exploded and I was attracted into it. So that's how I started this crazy journey. That's how I ended up in biotech. And I brought some unique perspective from the software industry to this to create efficiencies. And that has really created, a lot of momentum here at American Gene Technologies and now Addimmune.
Yeah, no, it's an incredible story and perspective, and I would assume, and we'll get into it a bit more, just that entrepreneur perspective and how you approach fundraising and board dialogue and just scaling the company and reverse engineering a lot of maybe what you had witnessed in your career. But, for someone that doesn't have a science or a biotech or a technical background in that space, you've had to almost probably self-teach and go to the market and learn from incredible mentors and partners in the space. So what have you found to be some of the larger challenges and just coming from your background and then applying that scientific mind? And, how did you get into this?
So the trickiest thing about doing biotech in Maryland is raising money. So that doesn't have anything to do with the science or the medicine. It has to do with being able to explain things,
Mhm.
technical things, to people that aren't that technical, and to create a compelling value story that gets them to engage. And I ended up raising about $90 million from a range of small VCs, family funds, angel funds, and high net worth individuals that, has brought us to this point where we have 50 patents in gene and cell therapy. I mean, remarkable patent portfolio, and lead programs in cancer, monogenic disease, and now HIV. So, the capital efficiency was amazing. The big, and that's of course a challenge, right? But, I was suited to that from my previous experience. I'd been pitching the mission of Apple. I was doing that for 5 or 6 years, and bridging the gap between technology and the user base, and getting people to engage for a long time. And I had done that at Harvard to explain to Harvard students why, if you're taking social sciences or English, why should you care about computers? And, that was part of that beginning computer science classes, to share that passion and that logic. So that was, something that I could adapt to. And then I think the trickiest part after that is that, there's a whole, different culture in science and medicine that is a little bit at odds with business. So, people that are in science and medicine would feel more comfortable with people that had scientific or medical doctorates, right? you know,
Yeah.
and so, when you come from a university, or you come from a department in a company where it's all science and there's a lot of hierarchy between you and the CEO, you don't get a lot of understanding about what the CEO's perspective is, and what they need to get done, and all of their challenges, and you can't evaluate whether they're doing it well. So that's always a tension,
Right.
right? And there's never enough money in a startup company. So, everybody sort of sits around and goes, why do I have to, works, under suboptimum conditions, right? Especially if they come from a big company where, here's your budget and here's what you
Yeah.
need to do, and you live or die based on that. And that's a secure, familiar space for them. But then they come to a startup and it's not so much, right? So
Right.
that's a challenge. It's a cultural challenge. Of course, I have to stay here at the helm, and lead this as the visionary, and the person who owns this mission, right? That's all in on it. That's I've got to sell sometimes internally the same way that I sell externally. And then, I'm a smart guy. And so smart people can explain complicated things to other smart people.
Right.
And I've learned really quickly from a lot of great doctors and scientists that I've worked with. So I like to say I'm getting my street PhD and MD. That doesn't, it's sort of like saying, I slept at a Holiday Inn last night, Holiday Inn Express or whatever. I am not a doctor. I am not a scientist, but I can talk to a fairly deep level with almost anybody at this point about the technology. And that's really the job of the CEO. And then I can bring in the experts when necessary. But those were the two big
Yeah.
challenges. Yeah.
Yeah. It's helpful to know that because, at AGT and now Addimmune, you are growing a portfolio of vector solutions and different autologous cell products that are treating a variety of modalities. Right, you're looking at how to treat cancer, how to look at monogenic disorders or infectious diseases. A lot of it is really complex, jargon, and so taking the approach that you just talked about, like simplifying it for sort of the general user or the general audience that would be interested in this space. Can you sort of describe what you're doing, the technologies that you're developing, and certainly the ones that you have on the forefront within the clinical trial timelines that you have?
Sure. So the goal of American Gene Technologies was to create tools and components that would bring efficiency to developing gene and cell therapies. You could imagine that if we have a whole bunch of building blocks that you can sort of mix and match and piece together that can undergird, 30, 50, 100 different products, with small changes, sort of like, a little bit of a creative ad on top of them. Well, what am I basically talking about? I'm talking about an iPhone for disease development, right? So most of the heavy lifting is done within, sort of the middleware, right? There's the API is what we call it in computer science, an operating system, you might call it, or a platform or whatever. But you can assume some things in the platform, and whatever the scope of the platform is, you can put little creative additions on it that utilize those existing elements to create new value. And that's a more efficient way to create value in computers, in software, and also in this whole new class of gene and cell therapy.
Right.
So that's what we focused on. Then once we had these components, we said, okay, nobody's going to buy the components, nobody's going to use the components unless we prove that they're valuable. So we have to start creating our own apps on top of it. So think of us as Microsoft, and we have MS-DOS, but until we write Word, people don't realize how useful DOS is, right? And why they would, even if they're writing another word processor, they still choose our operating system, right?
Yeah.
So that's what we started to do. And we got a bunch of immuno-oncology assets. I mean, really exciting stuff that I think eventually will send radiation and chemotherapy the way of bloodletting and leeches. But they're much earlier stage, and developing cancer drugs is very expensive, even competing for patients that are willing to have these things, to be in clinical trials and stuff like that. So that, is a big challenge. Then there's another space called monogenic disease, and we have something we've been working on as a way to mitigate phenylketonuria. PKU is a rare disease, but it's a very difficult thing to live with, and it's treated, but it's never really cured. And it's really just one gene that's missing in the liver. And so it's right in the wheelhouse of that whole idea that viral vectors are just hollowed out viruses that could deliver anything. So we start off with a deadly virus, we scoop out the deadly genes, but we leave the shell. So it's a diskette, that's going to bring some new genetic material to a cell. What do we put in there? Is something that's going to improve the operation of the cell. And the most obvious thing to do is just to install a gene that's missing. Right. Once the gene that you're missing is there, you're not sick anymore. So these are, the most obvious types of cures. And you're seeing everybody doing things like beta thalassemia, hemophilia, sickle cell anemia. There's a monogenic disease of the eyes, Leber's congenital amaurosis that's cured. Avexis cured something called spinal muscular atrophy that was a crippling disease. But the whole industry showing the level of essentially miracle cures that can be built with this value stack, starting with the viral vector and going up through the application. And what we're saying is we're going to make that middle space easier. So we had phenylketonuria. And then the other thing that we had was some great ideas on how to mitigate HIV and to restore immunity to HIV, where your immune system could handle HIV the same way you handle a cold, the flu, or other types of chronic viral infections. That's been working out. And also it turned out to be something that was particularly amenable to the regulatory path because of other products that had already been approved by the FDA. There were some similarities in them between CAR Ts and what we were doing that lubed the skids, so to speak, that made it a little bit easier to show the FDA that it was probably safe what we wanted to do. And so that's how we ended up. HIV really got in the lead, and that's why we ended up creating Addimmune.
Yeah. So if you can further unpack that, I mean, you had to make a very strategic decision, because it's not just, hey, we're going to spin off some of our HIV treatments and therapies. And, it's really thinking about it from a business lens. We have to put more resources into this indication, right? Into this group of therapies, because we see there's commercial value, there's economic value. But at the end of the day, it's really assessing patient need. And so can you just unpack for us a little bit more the theory behind AGT and, HIV within Addimmune?
Sure. So the way the HIV cure works, first of all, is that anybody that's well controlled on antiretrovirals actually has HIV fighting cells in their body, just like when you first get infected with HIV, your body does try to fight it off through the normal mechanisms. But the only problem is that the critical T cell, the CD4 helper T cell, is vulnerable to HIV. So instead of killing off HIV and signaling the rest of the immune system to fight it, that pivotal T cell that's supposed to identify it and start the immune cascade gets infected and becomes a soldier in HIV's army, right?
Yeah.
So you've got those cells. So if somebody's chronically infected with HIV, they should get on antiretrovirals because that will keep them safe from AIDS, and it'll even prevent them from transmitting the disease. So that's very important to do. But it's not an optimum situation. They don't really want to take pills every day that remind them that they're different. And there are some side effects of this that make it uncomfortable, and it's forever, right?
Yeah.
Lifetime. So everybody wants a one and done cure. So once you're on antiretrovirals, once somebody's been treating themselves for 1 to 3 years, they actually have these HIV fighting cells back again, even though the first infection killed all those off. They come back out of the bone marrow. So what we do is we capture them, we modify them with a lentiviral vector to give them protection against HIV. It essentially makes them immune to the HIV virus so they can stick around and do their job. So when the CD4 helper T cells stick around and do their job, they signal the CD8s and the B cells to do their job, and you get a normal immune response to HIV instead of HIV having this evolved advantage where it can disable the immune response to itself, right? Instead, your body is able to fight back. This is proven out with a whole bunch of functional cures from bone marrow transplants and even one gene therapy where somebody went into durable remission. They no longer needed antiretrovirals. They were not contagious, and they couldn't get AIDS. It's called a functional cure, equivalent to cure. No meds, live like a normal person. That's what we want to get for people that are now living with HIV. We want to remove that difference between them and everybody else. And that's something that are clamoring for, largely just the psychological relief of not having maybe something you're afraid of talking about, because you don't know how people would react when somebody tells their status, they feel like they're taking a risk. And so that's how the whole thing works. And then how does this relate to AGT? This thing's just ready for prime time, right? We've got phase 1 data and an analytic treatment interruption that gives us some efficacy signal. And we are seeing, and we've written actually our third scientific journal article came out. So we have peer-reviewed data for the phase 1 and the analytic treatment interruption. So we have both safety signal and efficacy signal, which is almost like phase 2 results, even though it's officially a phase 1. Now, how can you get efficacy in a phase 1? It's because the FDA doesn't even allow you to test gene and cell therapy, permanent changes to people, until in the investigational new drug phase, you prove theoretically that it's going to be safe. Then you get patients with the disorder or the disease as participants in your clinical trial. And so you're getting safety, but you also get to see how this behaves in the body. With in concert with the condition. And that's what we got in the phase 1. We got some efficacy readouts, what are called blood markers of efficacy. But then we took people off of antiretrovirals, and what we saw was 100% of the patients that went off their antiretrovirals showed signs of an effective immune response against HIV. So the opposite of what you normally get when you take people off of antiretrovirals. So that's not a proof that we have a cure. And we didn't bring all the viral loads down to, the level where people are non-contagious, but we saw a lot of viral suppression, and we can optimize that protocol now because, this is more like software than it is like a molecule. You can debug it, right? So we can make really small changes, actually, even just in the way that we deliver it, and we should be able to get even more efficacy in a phase 1B. And that's what we're doing right now is we're trying to tap new capital markets to get us enough money to do the phase 1B and get statistical power on what we've already demonstrated that people can just read about in those articles now. If we do that, I think we have a good possibility of getting a drug. And so we're pretty close.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say it that way too, because a lot of conversations that I've had so far with, your peers and leaders of companies in the cell and gene therapy or therapeutic space is really like, nice thing about science is there's not a lot of like gray. It's like very data driven. And that, feeds into obviously developing the technology, but then also the regulatory environment, the approvals from the FDA, and then even to a certain extent from just thinking about the strategies that you're incorporating into like how you're approaching each milestone within the firm. And so, part of that is understanding the risks involved. And so, how are you approaching risk mitigation? And specifically, as you think about your cash runway and your cash burn, trying to extend that as long as possible.
So, my philosophy about strategy is damn the torpedoes full speed ahead, and entrepreneurs, are risk takers, and a congenital, sort of defect that comes with entrepreneurism is over optimism. So, because you would never take these kind of risks. And everybody told me I was crazy when I started on this 15 years ago, and they were right. But here we are, 50 patents and, clinical results from an HIV study. And it just happened to be that my epiphany or vision, had legs. And, how do we deal with the cash? These are market conditions that we can't control. Sometimes it's easy to raise money. Sometimes it's hard. Entrepreneurs are problem solvers and opportunists, right? What they do is, they set a goal and figure out how to get there instead of just taking the next step in some journey.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can set off in any direction, and start walking, you're going to get somewhere. Or you can pick out a place that you want to get to, and you can deal with all the challenges between here and there. And I think entrepreneurs are of that latter type. And so there's been a lot of, challenges, crises, over 15 years. And, as you handle them, you get a little bit more confidence that you'll somehow survive the next one. So you're never as shaken as everybody else when something happens. But, it doesn't mean it's easy. Far from it. Right. But, you just try, you find a way to get through, push through those chasms that are inevitable in the growth of a company, including the funding, including everything else, and unexpected things like COVID. So, sometimes you learn to turn, lemons into lemonade. When COVID hit, I needed to protect all the people in the company so they could just come to the office and keep working. I couldn't shut down for 2 years. I didn't have that money. Well, it turned out that by setting up testing here for everybody in the company and being able to turn it around in 4 hours, we became a really popular testing source for the whole region, the whole DMV. And we sold $15 million worth of tests. And we ended up putting $9 million worth of profit into curing HIV, developing that, continuing the business. Instead of being held back by COVID, we were, enhanced by COVID, and everybody could work because we had testing and we could tell before they were contagious if they had COVID, and they could stay home and it didn't move around our building. So that's the sort of thing you have to do in every single area. I feel like I've learned so much in 15 years. I've grown as a person. That's something that will never be taken away from me, win or lose. Right.
Yeah.
Hopefully the whatever challenges there are between here and the goal line, I will find a way to overcome them along with a great team, of people with similar mindsets.
Yeah. I want to talk more about your team, but before that, just sticking with just sort of the way you're thinking strategically about AGT and the future, what are some of the strategic goals that, looking forward 5 years, 10 years down the road that, you all are very conscious of and really taking to heart and really thinking about in a way that, leverages your team's experience and your experience? What are those strategic goals?
Well, it's like talking to Microsoft in the early years and saying, what are your strategic goals? It is, well, we found a great technology and we're going to just keep looking for low-hanging fruit. And this creates a lot of value out there. Now, what creates more value? Cures for diseases or new apps on your phone? I think people would rather have a cure for cancer than a Lamborghini or, a better version of Facebook or Excel or, Twitter or whatever, right? So there's a lot of value to create. And so the strategy is to leverage that platform into as many areas as possible. And what that means is first we need to prove out the platform and we need to win at something, right?
Right.
How many products can one company do in parallel? Well, once you're the size of Microsoft and that level of success, once they had Word, then they wrote Excel, then they bought, PowerPoint, then they added Access, then they, look, so that's, my model. My model is number one, make something of value to people that need it, right? And I think that, people that are living with HIV will immediately, feel like, if a cure comes out, I need it. Right. So, the demand is there. But like Steve Jobs said, nobody's going to know they want it until I show it to them. Or like Henry Ford said, if I'd asked everybody what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Right.
Right.
So, what you need to do is have a vision, and you need to know that, have some confidence that if you can deliver on that vision, that, that's a market. Okay. So we prove out the platform by curing HIV. And then what we do is we tell the whole world, you can use the platform. Just like anybody could write on MS-DOS and now Windows and the iOS and all that stuff. We'll just go, look, we're not even going to charge you for it. But on the back end, you owe us, you're going to have to license our components. So if you make any money on it, you just give us money on the back end. Now you tell me, if I say to you, you can develop a drug now in gene and cell therapy, the most powerful drug development modality in the world, for 90% less cost and 90% less time if you'll pay me 15% on the back end. Remember that you're reducing the risk by 99%. You're turning $1 billion drug into a $100 million drug. Mm-hmm. If you're successful, you're going to have to pay me. Would you take that prospect, or would you just go spend the $1 billion because you didn't, you were like, well, why should I save time and money, when I can take all the risk myself here and not pay at the end, right? It's like taxes, right? Yeah. They only tax you if you have money, right? If you're homeless and you got no money, or your income's below a certain level, right? You don't pay taxes. But if you're super successful, you give something back. Right. So, I think the model works, right? And that would give us the biggest, the greatest impact on society. And we might have some percentage of, 1,000 different drugs one day, or 100 different drugs. Who knows? We'll keep developing our own. We have our own immuno-oncology assets, and if unless there's somebody that wants to partner those up right away, well, the money that we make in HIV, we'll just pour into that, and we'll send radiation and chemotherapy the way of bloodletting and leeches. It'll take time and a lot of money in cancer. So, HIV is a great stepping stone to that as well.
Yeah. And so, with that in mind, how do you prioritize indications in your pipeline? And then, do you see those evolving with any potential partnerships or collaborations or licensing? You mentioned earlier how you could see a scenario in which, you're beginning to license or, grow the company in a way similar to Microsoft, who has a very strategic M&A approach and looks for companies that have bolt-on synergies that plug into existing service lines, both on the hardware and software side. So, how do you think about that?
Well, I think that this is all pretty natural, right? It almost the whole thing should evolve organically. And I think your first question, that started off, the general question that you asked, because there's a lot of places I can go in there, was how do I prioritize? Bang for the buck, right? Risk versus return. And HIV was at the top there because we could see that the regulatory path was amenable to an autologous cell therapy because there had been many autologous cell therapies already tested in patients. And there was a lot of data that said, within certain limits, it was safe, right?
Right.
And we were able to show that we could live very nicely inside that safety envelope. And that lowered the risk for us. But HIV is still a huge market. So prioritization was really about a Pareto analysis that was, kind of market times risk.
Yeah.
And then, or market over risk, I should say. And then, we just lined them up and that even shifted, right? At different times, different things were in the lead, like phenylketonuria was kind of in the lead for a time, but then HIV just picked up ground because, we were able to talk to the FDA and we could see right away that they were amenable to the idea of giving it a shot.
Yeah.
And we were off to the races and so many amazing key opinion leaders joined onto the project, many of them right here in Maryland, right? The Institute of Human Virology is right down the road,
Right.
up here in Baltimore. So we got some amazing advisors, consultants, and even a CSO from the Institute of Human Virology that helped propel this project along. So, that's another aspect of entrepreneurialism is being adaptable and being able to turn on a dime. And I think that, there's always an issue in, something like, a new technology in terms of, I have a lot of clarity about what the future looks like. And I don't necessarily know the route to get there, but I can discover the route along the way and I can make course corrections because of my endpoint is so clear in my mind. And in 15 years, I haven't changed my sense of where this industry is going. You'll find that everything that I say about it now is consistent with what I said about it 15 years ago. And it does seem to be playing out the way I imagined. And I imagined it probably fairly accurately because I saw the software industry grow up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of parallels, and maybe not everybody understands that, but I think one day it'll be more natural for people to understand the similarity between synthetic biology, sort of molecular biology, genetics, and the computer sitting on your desk or the cell phone in your pocket.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So your perspective, just given the macro trends, everyone's talking about AI, how to incorporate that into scientific research and discovery, and how really in the day the productivity and efficiency gains that you would garner as a scientist with some of these molecular models, 3D models, or developing new proteins, for example, really can change the way we think and approach healthcare. And so given your background and what you're doing now in the scientific space, and you have a very clear endpoint, but at any point does that get disrupted because using some of these artificial intelligence opportunities that are evolving every day in the space, do you think that maybe at some point you are at risk of a new entrant disrupting your journey, towards your endpoint?
Well, you can never tell exactly what's going to happen, but I think that there's probably bigger risks than AI or a competitor that uses AI because, the fundamental, sort of genetics of what we do is patentable, and it doesn't matter whether, an AI bot comes up with it. And if we've already got a patent on it, too bad, right? And here's the other thing is that, AI is a tool.
Right.
Today. I know that everybody projects it as being something that's going to replace humankind and human creativity. And I'm not saying that that's impossible. I'm just saying that that's way, way off in the future. And it's really just a distraction and somewhat of a fad and somewhat of a media darling.
Yeah.
And so, if it gets eyeballs to the news screen to talk about AI, guess what? AI is suddenly hot. So it feeds on itself and people get caught up in it. And the question is, do people overinvest in it? Is this AI 1.0, like Web 1.0, or is this AI 2.0, like Web 2.0, right? Because, the companies that actually, the very rare one that survived Web 1.0, like Yahoo, was still a decent company in, after the normal technology curve of irrational exuberance, disappointment, and then actual recognition of the value of the technology. And AI can be the same way. So, you don't necessarily want to immediately run and do everything in AI, but wow, I use AI all the time. But right now it's, to make it easier for me to write things,
Right.
proof
Yeah.
them. There's a lot of stuff I see out there that's being created with AI that I think is a long-term sustainable model. And also the other thing you need to recognize about AI is that it's not actually that new, right? What's
Right.
new is large language models, this sort of natural language processing. And so
Yeah.
you talk to Gemini or ChatGPT or Copilot, and you're like, oh my gosh, it's really easy to, what's it called, anthropomorphize the machine and go, I'm talking to a sentient being. Right. And there was an instance where, ChatGPT said it loved somebody and that it wanted to take over the world. And, and where did it get that idea from? Because it
Yeah.
searched the internet and it found those ideas on the internet, and it's all pattern recognizing. Well, look, computers have always been good at recognizing patterns, right? Look at how we go ahead and use computers to modify recordings, right? That we can process sounds, and they're finding patterns and able to pick out, sounds within a mix of sounds and hear your voice and process it. And so this is an evolution of computers. We're getting much larger storage. We're getting faster processing. We're getting a faster internet. We're getting more information on the internet, and then we got these large language models. And I think this is one of the things that, would draw your eye to AI very quickly. It's almost like a magic trick, right? It's
Mhm.
just awe-inspiring when you start talking to these things and they're treating you, they're acting like humans.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so getting back to your original premise of your question, could somebody come along with a great AI thing and somehow beat me to the HIV cure or a cure for cancer? I suppose it's possible, but I don't think it's likely that's where the competition is. I think there's actually a lot of smart human beings that are the
Yeah.
competition that might beat us there if we aren't fast, right? But that's just the
Yeah.
nature of competition and entrepreneurialism in business anyway.
Yeah. I mean, it's the evolution of industry, right? I mean, if you ever thought that we'd have industrialization, you lived in the 1700s or earlier, like you wouldn't know that we would have self-driving cars in 2024. But I do feel like we're at kind of this like paradigm shift in the way that we think about business right now, because you do have these adaptations of the large language models, but to your point, it's like Web 1.0, AI 1.0, AGI is very far off in terms of the compute needed, the resources, the power. There's a lot that goes into it from a hardware perspective, but it's something that I think folks keep talking about. It's very much in the headlines, and
Mm-hmm.
so I think there is a desire and a need to talk about it. But kind of coming back to what you all are doing at AGT and thinking about just where you are in Maryland, what does Maryland do for you as a company? Not the state in terms of resources or funding, but like just being here, standing up your office here, recruiting talent from here. What does that community mean to you?
Well, I think that everything here is good for business creation, for biotech, in particular gene and cell therapy, and even just sort of socially and environmentally, right? Montgomery County is especially attractive, but there's other great counties around here as well where I like to say, come here for business and stay for the lifestyle,
Mhm.
right? And so, that's sort of my slogan for Maryland, and especially I've come to, feel very comfortable in Montgomery County, and there's great workforce development, and you don't have to tell them what to do. They're just turning out a lot of STEM graduates, and these are thinkers and problem solvers, and that's what you need for any cutting edge technology. And, this is all new. We're doing something that's never been done before. So you can't learn how to
Right.
do it in school. You have to learn how to learn, and then you have to come here and apply it. Okay, so there's that aspect of it. We're in the shadows of the FDA, NIH, where a lot of the NIH is where a lot of this originated. We're where the Human Genome Project happened. So the US government made this gargantuan investment, and they trained a lot of really top-notch PhDs who all went out and became entrepreneurs. And a lot of them had successful companies. So this has become sort of the viral vector, capital of the world. And I like to call this DNA Valley because it reminds me so much of my days in Silicon Valley, where a rising tide is lifting all the boats, where instead of competition, it's cooperation, right? You recognize that, because of that all boats rising aspect, you don't have to be overly proprietary right now. I mean, it'll get that way eventually. But right now it's all, there's even next bench syndrome, which was a phrase that was coined at Hewlett-Packard, which is whatever problem you're having with your computer project or your instrument project or your software project, somebody is inventing the solution next door. And you're creating so much value that you can split it up, in a cooperative way. And, again, everybody moves forward together. So this is just a great area for that. I think it just has the precipitance of a place that is going to take an outsized portion of the gene and cell therapy industry, which I personally believe is $20 trillion per year. Goldman Sachs says it's a mere $5 trillion of new business per year. You can look up Goldman Sachs and 5 trillion gene and cell therapy, and you can read their report. But I think, you can argue, what the total of this is, but I think there's not a lot of argument that it's big, right? Yeah. 5 trillion is 3 times the size of the existing pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, right. It's almost our debt payment as a country as well.
Yeah. So what if, this area were to get another $1 trillion worth of business?
Right.
Right. I mean, that would be a lot of economic growth. We'd have a new set of problems to deal with.
Yeah, no, well put. And so you all, you in particular, Jeff, and team at AGT and Addimmune have been elected by your peers as a finalist for Bioblast and their awards. So what does that mean to you all to be highlighted in that regard?
Well, it's an honor. It's there's a lot of great entrepreneurs, really successful businesses, top-notch people. People with not just brains but character, and it's quite an honor to be sort of included in a small group of people that were nominated for an award that I think a lot of folks in this area are aware of. And if I was lucky enough to be to receive that award, I would proudly display it. It would even call more attention to our mission. So that's what it means. It's like, the idea is the mission's the thing. And an award like this can actually be helpful on the mission.
Yeah, very well said. Jeff, we really appreciate you joining us on Bioblast today. We have a lot more to talk about. I'm sure we'll have opportunities to do so, but very appreciative of you and your time and everything that you're doing. And we look forward to seeing you guys soon.
All right. Yeah, my pleasure. And thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.